Buenas tardes, bona tarda. Això és la Virreina, centre de la imatge, y estamos en el ciclo al desordre ordinari. Como algunos sabéis ya, como algunos sabeu, esta es la segunda sesión de este ciclo en el que nos hemos propuesto investigar algunas de las aportaciones más relevantes que han tenido lugar a lo largo de los últimos años en el ámbito de la crítica cultural, con énfasis en las perspectivas sociológicas más actuales, más renovadoras, más interesantes de nuestros días. Algunos de vosotros seguro que visteis la sesión anterior con nuestro amigo Mariano de Santana, que nos ilustró sobre Las Palmas, sobre la arquitectura generada por el turismo, por lo que él denomina las ciudades medianas, y con él empezamos a desarrollar toda esta lógica, toda esta comprensión del espacio urbano, porque del espacio urbano entendido como un hipertexto, como un palimpsesto en el que se combinan muy distintos niveles de significado. A lo largo de este ciclo vamos a trabajar con los significados en muy distintas modalidades. Los significados en su estado sólido, en su estado líquido, en su estado gaseoso. Y nuestro invitado de hoy, que es el filósofo belga Laurent de Sutter, tiene sin duda una aportación muy importante que hacer en este sentido. Laurent, buenas tardes desde Bruselas.
Hello, hello. Nice to be there.
¿Qué tal? Pues es un honor para nosotros tener a Laurent por muchas razones. Una de ellas es que este último año, el 2011, que no ha sido un año logrado en todos los aspectos, al menos en algunos sí que, sí que ha sido un año para recordar, porque se han traducido nada menos que 4 textos de la extensa bibliografía de Laurent de Sutter. Laurent es autor de una veintena de libros en los cuales ha abordado géneros del pensamiento y modalidades de la filosofía sumamente distintas entre sí, pero que él es muy capaz de combinar y de relacionar. Laurent es profesor de Teoria del Derecho en Bruselas. Algunos de sus textos tratan sobre la filosofía de los textos, de los escritos legales. Uno de ellos, Après la loi, es uno de los que, de los más recientes y más significativos. Laurent es también un pensador de la época de las imágenes. Y es también un excelente pensador de la estética. Y uno de los resultados de esta dedicación es un ensayo breve pero muy sustancioso que lleva por título Pornografía de lo contemporáneo, que ha sido publicado en castellano por la editorial argentina Isla Desierta, y que es un análisis de una de las obras más conocidas del artista norteamericano Jeff Koons. Al abordar el trabajo de Jeff Koons, Laurent entró en una de las habitaciones prohibidas, por así decir, del arte contemporáneo. Koons, el autor kitsch con K mayúscula, el demonio entre los ángeles de la estética actual, y realizó una inflexión sumamente renovadora dejando atrás las antiguas dicotomías entre buen gusto y mal gusto, entre alta cultura y baja cultura. Entre las muchas cualidades que tiene Laurent está la capacidad para escribir textos sintéticos, centrados y focalizados. A pocos autores de pensamiento les cunden tanto 60, 70 páginas como a él. Y esta es la extensión, luego nos hablará de su método de escritura y de la manera en que prepara cada uno de sus trabajos, como inflexiones muy específicas, muy lúcidas sobre un aspecto del mundo de las ideas contemporáneas, del mundo de las imágenes. Además del libro del que hoy nos hablará, seguro que os interesará saber que dentro de poco podremos disponer de otro de sus textos traducidos. Este libro lo va a publicar la edición española de Penguin Random House y lleva por título Narcocapitalismo. Este es un libro lúcido, iluminador y sumamente divertido que traza una historia del capital en la modernidad que, tal como Laurent la imagina y la explica, no se puede separar de los opiáceos, de los alucinógenos y de la relación de los ciudadanos, de los sujetos del capitalismo tardío con las drogas. Está el punto de definir un orden de los signos y del comercio en el cual el capital circula a través de las drogas y las drogas circulan a través del capital. Hay una anécdota que cuenta en este libro que es muy representativa de la manera de pensar de Laurent, y es cuando hace una relectura de la crisis financiera del 2008, de la caída de Lehman Brothers y de todos los acontecimientos que conocemos y que han determinado nuestra manera de escribir, de vivir, en términos de drogas. Es decir, cuando saca a la luz el hecho de que en el 2008, en el momento en que se empieza a caer el castillo de cartas y en Wall Street todo el mundo retira su dinero de los bancos, ¿quiénes son los únicos que sostienen, que dejan su dinero ahí? Los únicos, digamos, de los que tienen muchos millones. Sí, lo han adivinado, precisamente los cárteles de las drogas. De no ser por ellos, lo que conocemos como la caída del sistema hubiera sido la caída de verdad. Nos habríamos hundido, pero con todas las de la ley. No sé si a raíz de esto hay que agradecerles algo a los de los cárteles de las drogas, luego discutimos sobre este aspecto, pero me parece un ejemplo muy significativo de la manera que tiene Laurent de leer fenómenos contemporáneos en los que se combinan la política, la estética y los posts y prefijos que todas ellas traen consigo.
Cheers.
Sí, ¿verdad? Además de estos otros textos, luego en la sesión, en la parte de debate, comentaremos algunos más. El que hoy nos ha reunido aquí es un texto que ha publicado en español la editorial Cactus y que lleva por título ¿Qué es la pop filosofía? Este texto parte de algunas referencias específicas que se pueden encontrar en la obra de Gilles Deleuze y hace un singularísimo desarrollo de algunas de las ideas que Deleuze apuntó, si bien no acabó de desarrollar en la parte final de su trabajo, y en las cuales relaciona, o hace tensionar los términos pop y filosofía, entendidos como dos aparentes términos de una contradicción, de una negación, que, tal como Laurent lo explica, pueden iluminarse el uno al otro, pueden comentarse entre sí. Le iremos a hablar ahora, por tanto, y desde Bruselas sobre la pop filosofía. Y después de su intervención, lo que vosotros queráis, quiere decir que está abierto el chat para preguntas, intervenciones, comentarios, etcétera, los que dedicaremos aproximadamente los últimos 20-25 minutos de esta sesión al desordre ordinario. Así que, sin más preámbulos, os dejo con la pop filosofía y con Laurent de Sutter.
Well, thank you, Eloy. Thank you for this very lovely and most generous, too generous introduction to my little things. I'm truly sorry for not being able to speak either Catalan or Castilian, but it's, shit happens, as they say. So you'll have to bear with my shitty international English. With some kind of false English theatrical accent that I tend to use in those circumstances. So bear with me if you don't mind with that. I would like to before I start and try and say a couple of things, I would like sincerely to thank you a lot for the invitation again, because especially in those very strange circumstances, it's the fact that the only thing that seems to be left for us besides books is those kind of digital exchanges. And even though we're not in the same room and I don't see you people from the digital limbos, yet there's perhaps a glimpse at what a sense of community might mean in a post-digital age, something post-digital age where the virus is at the same time something that affects our lives, but also something that affects our brains through ideas. So, and I'm also very grateful to Eloy, simply because I love the guy. He's so brilliant and talented, and I love the fact that he let me do something. It's a secret that it's between all of us, but he actually let me publish one of his books in English before it has been published in Spanish. It's this one. So it's a great book. So when it's out, please do check it out. But yes, I'm supposed to talk about this book, what is pop philosophy, and I insist on the fact that it's about talking about a book. I insist on that for a very simple reason, or for two reasons, to be fair. The first reason is directly related to the content of and the topic of the book itself, and the second is some kind of an article of faith that I have concerning thought, namely the fact that thought, ideas, theories, actually they don't exist. I mean, there's no such thing as floating, ideas that would exist in some kind of an ether, and that we could simply, plug ourselves or our brain into this, the subterranean or subliminal dimensions and suddenly experience theory or ideas or whatever. The experience that we have of ideas or theories, whatever they are always mediated experiences that exist into a very specific media setting. And if you take the media setting out, suddenly the ideas themselves disappear. And it's true from the Greeks and their fantastic system of public place called the agora, where indeed the media was the architecture itself, up to precisely the digital environment that we are using for the moment, and of course the book. So I'm not into speaking about ideas or theories. I don't have ideas. I don't have theories. I do books. And as Eloy said earlier, these books, to be fair, are quite numerous, and they're all quite short also, for reasons that also pertain to the present, the contemporary condition, which is the condition of Facebook posts and Twitter posts, and of acceleration of the dissipation of attention and so on and so forth. So in those times, I think it's both a question of politeness to be as short as possible, and also a question of putting philosophy or or theory in general under the condition of some sort of, let's say, brevity that would be attuned or that would echo the type of relationship that we have, for instance, with TV shows, when we jump from one episode to another. Well, let's say that my books always are episodes in a series, poorly produced series and poorly written series where the showrunners don't necessarily know where they want to go. Maybe they would love to retain the attention of one or two spectators, but that's not even sure. But it's in that respect that these books exist. They exist always in relationship to others. And we were discussing that just before with Eloy. That's also why the experience of translation of books into another language are sometimes so strange, because you write your series of books in your own language and then they're translated in a different order, sometimes with a gap of several years, into another language, transforming the series, transforming the narration of your own, let's say, research into something quite different. And this is what's happening for the moment for me in the Spanish-speaking world. Now, to go back to the idea of pop philosophy, I had the idea about this very little book for quite a while. And the reason for that is very simple. I simply had become irritated and fed up with the use that was made by the expression pop philosophy. I don't know how it is in the Spanish world, but in the French-speaking world, especially in France, pop philosophy has become a syntagm, a signifier that has started to circulate very heavily into the intellectual circles, and not simply the intellectual circles, but also more broadly the media circles and the circles of let's say, pedagogy, the pedagogy of ideas and of theory and of philosophy. And it had become some kind of a brand, but a brand that is a little bit weird, a brand that is doubtful and suspicious. And the suspicion has transformed into open hatred and open detestation on the side of some very prominent and less prominent philosophers, as if the idea of pop philosophy, whatever that means, it's something that circulates, always implied a form of, decadence, or a form of surrender or surrendering to forces that we don't want to surrender to. Namely, pop philosophy was understood, or is understood, in a very standardized or normal or reflex kind of way, as implying either a certain idea of, okay, pop philosophy is, well, pop means popular, so pop philosophy is popular philosophies, philosophy popularized, philosophy vulgarized for an audience that doesn't want to make the effort to deal with serious philosophy. So pop philosophy is all these festivals and these books and these TV or radio shows that want to bring philosophy to a larger audience, but at the price of lowering the level of what philosophy truly is, as if pop philosophy was a form of degenerate version of philosophy that was taking more and more room and so much space that at some point somebody had to stop with pop philosophy. It's actually something bad for philosophy. It's the journalist version of philosophy. Another variation on the same idea and the same negative view that the syntagm pop philosophy was having is the idea that pop philosophy is indeed has something to do with pop understood as pop culture. So the fact that philosophy, being a discipline that has always is complicated relationship with its outside, has nevertheless always considered some form of, let's say, writers. It was mostly writers or poets as people with whom philosophy could dialogue in order to enrich, its own scope or its own reach. And think of, for instance, Paul Celan or Stéphane Mallarmé, or think of William Shakespeare or the Greek tragedians and so on and so forth. So all these authors of the canon, they were good enough for philosophy to dialogue with. But at some point, some people that would, started to think, yes, but, there's also pop culture. And pop culture is cool. Pop culture is our generation. Pop culture is us, video games and TV shows and movies and comics and I don't know, hard-boiled novels and techno thrillers and science fiction and fantasy and so on and so forth. So there's all that is left aside from philosophy. And perhaps it would be a good idea then to reconnect philosophy with the culture of our generation, for whatever that means again, and to reconnect it in such a way that pop culture could serve as a more efficient introduction to philosophy, where pop culture would simply be, if you want to understand the categorical imperative or the definition of the transcendental in Immanuel Kant, well, maybe watch Batman and you will understand it, more easily. So there was this second understanding of pop philosophy as something a little bit degraded or something a little bit second, something a little bit bad, after the idea that pop philosophy was simply philosophy going popular, meaning going vulgar, so going to the vulgus, going to the people. There was the idea of pop philosophy as being philosophy going pop, so just capitalizing on the glitter of pop culture, and by capitalizing on the glitter of pop culture, also surrendering to the dark capitalist forces that dominate pop culture and the imagination, be it Hollywood, the big TV broadcasts, companies, and so on and so forth. And at some point, when you hear that once, you say, okay, yeah, you moron, fine. Let's just say twice and three times and so on. And then it goes bigger and bigger. And then you see very clever people say, adopt this use of the word pop philosophy and start to say, what are you talking about? What are you talking about, people? Do you realize what you're saying? Do you realize that this expression that seems to have appeared out of nowhere, that you're using now to condemn everything that doesn't fit with some kind of canonical definition that you would have of philosophy, do you know what it really means? This floating signifier, or this apparently floating signifier, do you know where it comes from? Do you know what was the intention behind the use of this syntagm? Do you even spell it right? So I decided to dedicate a little effort into I wouldn't say righting the wrongs, because I'm not a vigilante, I'm not trying to get revenge on all those people, but simply to give a happier take on it, to let's say, to give back the smile on the face of the person who actually invented it, if doing something like that for dead people is possible. And indeed, the person who invented this syntagm in the mid 1970s was indeed the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, in some very haphazard conceptual creation that was simply used in his work twice. Apparently, there are a couple of seminars where he mentioned the concept around the same time, so around 1973, 1977. But let's say that there are two major occurrences and maybe two minor in the entire work of one of the most important philosophers of the second half of the 20th century, right? So it's almost nothing. And appearances that are absolutely not developed, meaning that the word appears, boop, in the middle of a sentence, and then it disappears as fast, without any form of definition or without any form of elaboration, as if it was something that had its own meaning in itself, and that didn't require much elaboration to be understood for what it was. And the funny thing about this word is that Deleuze spells it in a very specific way, namely pop. It's not pop with, a little bar philosophy. It's not pop space philosophy. It is pop upper comma, I don't know how you call that, philosophy. Like, when Alfred Jarry, the inventor of pataphysics, this imaginary this imagine the science of the imaginary problems, of the imaginary solutions to the absence of problem. That's the definition that Alfred Jarry gave of pataphysics in his novels and in his plays and in his essay. Pataphysics also starts with this, upper comma, like if something was missing, or like some added member or remainder of something, or irreducible sign of the fact that something is broken by it, and so on and so forth. So it's hard to understand, but Deleuze spells it that way: pop philosophy. And it's not pop philo, it's not, So I said, okay, let's take that seriously. Let's go and see, despite the fact that I'm not very fond, to be fair, and again, between us, I'm not very fond of commentaries of authors. Most of the time it's a waste of time, and I prefer to, everybody is capable of reading. You're capable of reading. So if you want to know what Kant or Marx or Hegel or Eloy Fernandez Porta have to say, you just buy the book and open the book and you can read by yourself. But when things are so distorted, especially for something so tiny that is such so discrete, well, sometimes you have to make the effort and go and see and try and unfold what the problems are, because something so small, and it is especially the case with Deleuze, can lead, and it's something that Derrida has told us, can lead symptomatically to, well, maybe bigger lessons. So I went to Deleuze's text, and I noticed first the very strange context of appearance of this context. When Deleuze speaks about pop philosophy, it appears in what I find the most fascinating text of all Deleuzian texts, namely a reply that Deleuze wrote to a young philosopher. The guy was 25 or something at the time, and who had written a book. It was the very first book ever written about him. It was in 1973 when Deleuze was at the peak of his pop star glory, at least in France, where the anti-Oedipus had been released. Was a big, let's say, both media but also commercial success. The first book he had written with Félix Guattari, and now there's this book written by this young philosopher, Michel Cressol, about Gilles Deleuze and about his work. And it's a very mean book. It's a very mean book. It's a book that tries to behave like it's admiring its object, but with lots of, like the nails on the board, it's lots of overtones. And at the end of his book, Michel Cressol decided to ask Deleuze if he would give a postscript to the book under the form of a letter. And Deleuze read the manuscript and said, fuck, I'm insulted. Why would I reply to this guy? But he decided to do it nevertheless. And he wrote this postscript, this letter, where he says, man, what are you doing to me? You're reading myself, you're reading my work with so much bad intention, so to speak. You don't read it, actually. The only thing that you read in it is the thing that you want to read in it, the things that were already there before you started your own reading, and that you want to apply upon me. And whatever I can say, whatever I can do, I'm fucked, because how can I resist to that? There's no chance for me to resist to that. You have chosen this path. You have chosen the path of being mean. So, well, what am I to do? But it's good sport, and says, but there's maybe some point where you're right. Maybe you're right when you say that anti-Oedipus, this book about this violent deconstruction of psychoanalysis and the Oedipus complex. Maybe you're right in saying that it was a failure. I do agree with you. Actually, this book is a failure. This book is a failure. It is not, and that's what Deleuze writes, it is not the pop analysis, the pop philosophy that I dreamt of. Point. And it's gone. It's not the pop philosophy of the pop analysis that I dreamt. The word pop analysis would disappear and would never reappear in Deleuze's work. Pop philosophy would reappear a few years afterwards in his dialogue with Claparnay in a different context, but also in a situation which is slightly similar, namely a situation where it is about reading. That's why I was speaking earlier on of books and the importance of books, because it's all about books, strangely enough. And you will see how strangely in a moment, but strangely enough, pop philosophy is all about books because it's all about reading. And speaking of reading, later, a few years later, Deleuze reuses the expression pop philosophy in order to describe some form of a contrast that allows us to understand why he considered anti-Oedipus as somehow a missed opportunity. And he distinguishes in his dialogue with Claparnay, where the word pop philosophy reappears, say, okay, maybe there's this thing, pop philosophy, and this thing basically is what? It's the possibility to distinguish between two forms of reading. And the first form of reading, he says, is what he would call the box. Reading as getting back, putting things in a box. Meaning reading with the eyes of Michel Cressol, reading with the eyes of the one who actually knows what he or she is going to find in the book, reading in such a way that what you will read will not be an encounter with something strange, different, or something that could bring you to some unexpected place, but something that you have to, upon which you will verify your own knowledge and your own strength, and something that you will read as a professor, let's say, would read a student's, dissertation and putting, little notes in the margin. No, not true, bad, wrong spelling. The way you read something by simply weighing according to your own standards the things that you are actually reading. And he says maybe there's another way of reading. Maybe we can read differently than that. And maybe we can read in a way, and that's why it becomes important and interesting and also striking. Maybe we could read in such a way, or with the same, let's say, intensity, with the same poise or the same grasp, or with the same kind of experience, or not even the same kind of experience, the same kind of radicality as the one we feel we experience when we listen to a song, a pop song on the radio, when we look at a show at the television. And these are the examples that Deleuze uses. He uses the radio, he uses the pop song and the pop concert. He uses a television as points of comparison for a possibility left aside by the corrective, the box version of reading. And what he defends there is, and his words are very elusive. That's why they're interesting also. They're very elusive and they never get technical. He says the difference between the two is that in one case, well, nothing happens. Whereas in the other case, what he says is ça passe. Something passes by, something passes through. And this something that passes through is what he calls some form of electricity. And it's quite strange that you think about electricity as something that passes and that changes the direction of reading, and that changes the regime of reading, and that changes, which is much more important, the effects of reading. Why? Because simply in the case of the box, the book or whatever you read doesn't count. Whatever you encounter, if it's not a book, doesn't count. The only one thing that counts is your own position, let's say, of reading, how it is endangered or how it is secured and how it is guaranteed. Whereas in the other idea, the idea that something, we don't know what, but something can pass by, means that there is an element of estrangement that is at stake with reading. The fact that reading is not something that you can conclude about, it's not something that you can evaluate, it's not something that you can put, let's say, an end mark to it, but something that breaks with the very frontier of the act of reading itself. And that's why the expression pop philosophy is so important, because in pop philosophy, you have the two. You have indeed pop, and you have philosophy. And then you have this strange mark between the two. It's kind of some form of discrepancy or gap, let's say, that exists between the two. And when you say, and when you know that Deleuze, as a matter of fact, had always been nostalgic of a philosophy that has never existed, and that actually his entire work or his entire oeuvre was all about the possibility of what he called transcendental empiricism. So the possibility of a form of thought that would, as he put it himself, that would go out, or that would help philosophy go out of philosophy. That's the expression he uses. You have to, it's about using philosophy to leave philosophy, so to speak, to leave philosophy altogether, or to open philosophy to what it is not, or to open philosophy to its own negation, so to speak. Pop philosophy there become a very important syntax. Why? Because it's pop philosophy. It's not philosophy. So when Deleuze speaks about pop philosophy as a way of reading texts, he thinks, of course, of philosophical texts and of reading texts that would adopt an intensifying gaze akin to the one that we experience with pop songs or radio or television. What he speaks is precisely about a form of philosophy that is already not philosophy, or that is already not philosophy anymore. That is already something which is outside of philosophy. But there's a danger there, because, we love the outside. We all love the outside, and it has become something, it's part of, let's say, our theoretical pop culture, so to speak, that there's always the outside, and always go to what is not limited by, the frontiers and the barriers of thought or gender or history of culture or whatever it is. So it's always about go and see to some other place. The important nuance that Deleuze brings here is that precisely it's not about tourism. The problem with the outside is that most of the time you go and see, and then you go back home. And in the framework of philosophy is that, okay, you accept that there's an outside of philosophy, and then you go and see the outside of philosophy, and you go and see, I don't know, biology, or you go and see pop culture, or you go and see, I don't know, what happens in some tribes in Amazonia, or you go and see plants, or you go and see, and then you go back and you do philosophy again. Simply, you have had this experience of the outside, and this experience of the outside nourishes your philosophy. But from the point of view of what philosophy is, or theory, if you want to replace philosophy by theory, I don't mind, because I'm not a philosopher. So we can replace philosophy by theory, or by any other word that you have in mind. Let's say that philosophy is some kind of a cynic dark or metonymy of any form of thought that you can think of. So if you do that, you go outside, you do your shopping, and then you get inside, maybe you will change the content of your philosophy. Maybe you will invent things, but philosophy as such will remain this discipline with its prestigious history, with its great figures, with its big questions. It would remain this thing where some categories of people can keep their, let's say, their place as little chiefs, And Deleuze gives 3 examples of those who are in this position. Is the example of the erudite, the people who knows everything. And he gives the example of Umberto Eco, which is very mean, of course, but Umberto Eco is the one who, you can talk about anything, from quantum physics to Superman, to medieval theology, to 19th century Victorian sex practices. He knows. He has an answer. He has a funny anecdotes to tell. He has read all the books and so on and so forth. So there's the erudite. Then the second type of person for whom the travel by the outside doesn't count, because you go back home and then you can let's say act it as you can do your surveillance act. Again, is the moralists, the one who deduces moral issues or moral lessons from whatever he or she sees, looks, or understand. And the third one, so the erudite, the moralist, and the third one is, of course, the professor who, you know, does the correction in the margin, say, no, it's right or it's wrong. If you accept the outside as simply a promenade that you will do from time to time, like Georges Canguilhem in The Normal and the Pathological advocated for, saying that, you know, all philosophy need what he called foreign matter in order to exist, meaning by that, that philosophy as such doesn't have any personal or inner matter. Philosophy is simply a way of dealing with external matter or external issues. Even if you think so, you keep the control of how you see this external matter, how this outside is part or not part of your, let's say, views of the world, visions of the world. You don't put your concepts or ideas into danger. You don't put them at risk, to put it that way. So when Deleuze speaks about going out of philosophy from philosophy, actually what he speaks is the possibility of a conflict between philosophy and pop philosophy, as what he can dream about as this stepping outside of philosophy from philosophy, as this little coin, it's not a coin, this little shard, you know, introduced within philosophy, so that the closure of philosophy suddenly becomes impossible, and that there's this pop of the opening of the box, you know, the box that is not sealed anymore because there's a little bit of vacuum that enters, and then bloop, things suddenly explode or things suddenly open. And this call for, you know, some form of a traveling that pop philosophy can imply, whether it is through pop culture or whether it is through very serious issues. And that's why there's something strangely deceiving, but in a good sense of the word, in the idea of pop philosophy, is that pop philosophy is not at all about pop. It's not at all about pop. There is no conflict between high and low culture that could be solved by simply saying that low culture is, you know, more legitimate, for instance, than the high culture that has been legitimate for a century. It's not about weighing the legitimacy of some different types of culture. It's about doing something with whatever culture there is. And that's why the idea that is central to pop philosophy is really that one. It's the idea of whatever. You remember maybe this Woody Allen movie, whatever works, with Larry David, you know, having you know, trouble in his life and having an affair with a very, very, very young and openly stupid young lady, and there's this title, you know, of the movie, so whatever works, which reminds a little bit of Paul Feyerabend, you know, famous epistemological stances, which was a little bit the same, you know. So it was also anything goes, you know, anything goes, or whatever works. It's a bit the same. But I believe that there's this idea of whatever, which is very central. So instead of weighing the legitimacy of different things and trying to decide what is important, what is not important, the issue is always about what you will do with whatever there is. And pop philosophy is, from that perspective, a call to the outside, or to explore the outside, not from the point of view of the strange, the weird, or the point of view of what has been left out of the dominant culture, but also from the point of view of what the dominant culture, so to speak, is, and what it can do or cannot do, what we can do new and different with Paul Celan or William Shakespeare, if you want to do something with Paul Celan and William Shakespeare. It's about the effects that you want to give to thought in terms of exploration or experimentation, rather than in terms of judgment and classification, in terms of, let's say, in terms of critique, to use the word that defines really the modernity, the philosophical modernity, at least since Immanuel Kant and his three critique. So I've decided to dedicate this little effort. I'm trying not to divulge too much, so that there's a reason to read the book, despite the fact that it's so, you know, it's so small. So what I wanted to do with this idea of pop philosophy was to try and give back to the concept its urgency, the fact that this is a call for something which is at the same time new, but also general, meaning that it's not limited to the mere limits or the mere frontiers, the mere borders of pop culture, because that's precisely what has been reproached, what has been criticized with the idea of pop culture, that it was about, you know, these low culture guys, you know, it's like in the movies, you know, when you love Z series movies, you know, we all do now love Z series movies, but when you go to circles where people are, you know, have fetish for that, you know, very cheap horror movies, for ridiculous Turkish science fiction version of Star Wars, or for whatever, or for some weird kung fu film from the 1970s with no budget. Actually, when you discuss with these people, and when you are in circles where, you know, this is a fetish, you have the feeling that you're in the very same and obnoxious and boring setting than when you're in a, you know, academic conference of people trying to dissect once again, you know, the meaning of Franz Kafka's fable about, you know, in front of the law, you know. And you have the same feeling, and this feeling is indeed what this is all about. It's not about the object, it's about how you look at the object and what you do with the object. And I think that there is a lesson, let's say, in pragmatism in the sense of William James, and not in the sense, of course, of being pragmatic, that is decisively embodied in Deleuze, in this idea of pop philosophy, going, you know, exploring the outside of philosophy, or exceeding philosophy from the point of view of philosophy itself, exploring the possibility of transcendental empiricism, this kind of strange coincidence between opposites, can pass by this idea of pop philosophy as the intensifying of whatever. The intensifying of whatever, the fact that you can do whatever with whatever, and you can do whatever with whomever and with whichever mean. And this acceptance of whatever, whichever, whomever, is the acceptance not of some form of relativism where everything, okay, if whatever works or anything goes, then, you know, everything is equal. No, it's the contrary. If everything is equal, nothing is equal, because everything has its own singularity that needs to be explored, unfolded, and rendered productive. So there is let's say that with the idea of pop philosophy, the idea is not to popularize philosophy. It's not the idea to make philosophy simpler. It's actually something very ascetic, you know? There's an ascesis to that. The intensifying of our gaze and the intensifying of what we see, so that what we see is rather more interesting rather than less, is actually an exercise in raising the difficulty of our thought, making theory or ideas or concepts something that requires more in terms of efforts than simply critical conclusion, or what philosophy would do before, by erecting these fantastic, you know, systems that would have answers to everything at the same time. So there is also, and maybe I will stop down because I'm seeing that I'm already talking a lot. There's the idea with pop philosophy of the primacy of the singular over the general, of course, but also the primacy of the object as this weak thing whose singularity always depends on the renunciation in the person who looks at the thing, who reads the text, who watches the movie, who encounter a person, the renunciation to its own force, its own power of erasing this singularity through the generality of the categories with whom the thing in question is observed, understood, explained. Horrible, you know, horrible word to explain. Why do we need to explain things? Corrected, and eventually voided, criticized, and nullified. So that's what I wanted to try, explain, and develop. And I don't know if I've succeeded. If you read the book, if you have the courage to read the book, you will tell me, because I'm available on social networks or anywhere. But that's the let's say the basic message that I wanted to pass by.
Cool, thank you, Laurent. That was a really great lecture and a great speech, and really enlightening, different senses, different terms of the word. There's certainly a hell of a lot to discuss, and we got a couple of questions from some of our excellent spectators. Some of them have to do with Deleuze, who's one of the names of the game today. So Anna here is interested in knowing, like, how was it in your reading of Gilles Deleuze that you reached the conclusion that particular note, the note from that text that in Spain was translated as Carta a un crítico severo, how was it that you developed a reading of the margins, so to speak, of that letter, and reached the conclusion that those sentences have had this potential as a possible program for philosophy or for counter philosophy?
Well, thank you very much, Anna, for this question. It's a very great question that would require a long answer on my behalf, and an answer that would mix different things, both pertaining and related to Deleuze's work as such, but also to my own personal, let's say, habits or antics, depending on how you see them. Namely, the fact that I try to, as much as I can, I try to read texts as an ignorant. I try to read them as an ignorant with too much knowledge. So if I can put it like that. And when you read Deleuze, I mean, or any other giant like Deleuze, you know that there's always a library, going with it. And there's always all those people, bright people, brilliant people, diplomed, diplomaed, I don't know how you can say that, overqualified persons. And how would you add something to that? Why would be the sense of adding yet another texts on the pile of texts about deterritorialization, about the body without organs, about the event? I'm not more clever than anybody else, so if they have said that, what I can do is dig for the dirt. And this is something that is very close to my heart, digging for the dirt. And I think that part of the appeal that the concept of pop philosophy had for me was because precisely it was a dirt. It was something that was cast away or left aside by the official Deleuzians, and that was considered as not worthy of interest from those who had even forgotten about the fact that the concept of pop philosophy comes from Deleuze. The circulation of the empty signifier I was speaking about at the beginning. So when you have this gaze or this interest for dirt and shit and what's left aside, and then, well, you are forced to overcome, let's say, the general repulsion for it, or the general disgust for it. And then you have to work harder. You have to work harder to give it its dignity. And that I like. I like bits of sentences, bits of paragraphs, bits of text that force me to work. That means to reread everything. And in such a way that all this knowledge that I have, or that I supposedly have, is, loses its weight and its interest because you have to be a baby again. And precisely this is something, maybe you will find, you will consider that I'm over-identifying myself, but this is something that Deleuze himself wrote at several occasions, that or spoke about in his famous, abécédaire, in the famous video conversations with Claparnet, when he says that, compared to Umberto Eco, precisely, who is a person who has always his entire library in his head, Deleuze had to relearn things every time that he wrote about something. I think that going for these little margin, this dust on the on the side of the road, forces you to relearn everything, and because you have to relearn everything from fresh, you put in a situation where you can also do something out of it that is new. And to be fair, again, normally I don't do books about commentaries, commentary books or monographs. I don't do that because, as I said, I find it a little bit boring. But the only excuse that this one has is that it's so tiny. But here, yeah, with Deleuze, it's already a second time, because I did one that is also translated into. I'm gonna do a commercial for the moment. That is also translated to Spanish. I did this one more than 10 years ago, which is on law, where I did this very weird. I attempted this very weird task to say, okay, there's a philosophy of law or philosophy of law in Deleuze, and it's not simply a philosophy; it's a full system, and it's maybe the most articulated of all systems that you can find in Deleuze. And I wrote this book, which is based on simply bits and pieces from the very first text in the 1950s up to the very last in the 1990s. And rereading the entire oeuvre, the entire Deleuzian oeuvre with that in mind, I realized that law was everywhere, there, but simply one sentence here, a footnote there, a paragraph here. And you can, when you put that together, you realize something. Fuck, the man was obsessed with that. And he even said it when he said that he would have, if he wouldn't have studied philosophy, he would have studied law to become a judge. He said it explicitly in his dialogues with Claparnet, the TV dialogues. And it's as if nobody has taken that into account or considered that seriously. So they say, okay, how do you combine that with the idea that he has also expressed that he would rather be cleaning the streets than being a judge, precisely? What does that mean? How does this articulate? And then you have all these bits and pieces of sentences, and then it's a puzzle, and then, or a mood board, if you prefer, and then you put them together, and then suddenly you watch and you say, fuck, the man knew up to the tiniest detail about what he was talking about. So I have to take that seriously, because he took it seriously. And the biggest compliment I've ever received about this first book is from Clément Rosset, the late Clément Rosset, so French philosopher who I think is quite extensively translated into Spanish, and who was a friend of Deleuze who taught with Deleuze at some point. And he wrote to me with a kind of tongue-in-cheek tone that if Deleuze would have ever decided to write a book on law, he would have probably have written the book that I had written. And I say tongue-in-cheek because by saying so, he suggested that Deleuze would never have had this completely numbnut idea, and that it's all in my fucking head, and Laurent de Sutter, fine, but you made this all up, And I found it's, the best compliment that I could have, that this thing was of complete fiction that became more real than reality itself. And maybe it's the same with the idea of pop philosophy. Maybe it's more real than reality itself. Maybe it's simply over-interpretation, overblown interpretation on my behalf. But I love it even more because of that, because precisely the overblown interpretation or the over-interpretation is more than the interpretation. It's more than what is required by the rules of interpretation, and is more than what is required by the normal game of thought and the normal game of theory and ideas, but in such a way that it allows experimental formulations or ideas or concepts to be expressed. So to read in that fashion was to apply pop philosophy, so to speak. It was doing pop philosophy, because if pop philosophy is a creative or experimental reading based on the idea of consequences, you will not read it as if it was a box reading. You have to read it in a way that will in itself be its own self-creation. Or, well, at least that's how I see it. So that's what there also is, hopefully, in this book. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that was great, and I think it's certainly a very articulated answer, and it makes me think that the way you put it, well, pop philosophy would be, among other things, like a pragmatics of thought, rather than like a program for thought, and that relates to what you just said about. That relates to the issue of the figures of thought. In your speech, you mentioned 3 different intellectual types. There's the man who knows, like Umberto Eco. Then there's the moralist who makes ethical points, and then there's the professor who just corrects and give grades. And the 3 of them are intellectual types or intellectual characters, as Michel Foucault would say, that of course wander through the story of modern thought. So the question here would be: is there, or could there be, a particular figure that or a particular intellectual character that could like embody a pop philosophy? Is that even thinkable?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that there are 2 ways. We can reply to this question in 2 ways. We can either cast it aside by saying that precisely it's not about types, but it's about betraying the very possibility of types, so that there would never be one character, but whomever or whichever character can become, let's say, a character that embodies pop philosophy, as long as it produces electric intensification of thought. But maybe that would be easy. Maybe we can try and find a character that could do that. Maybe we can apply. No, applying is never good, but we can try and see if we could put a name on that would be absolutely unbearable.
What I'm thinking is, if there is such a figure, and I'm not saying it has to exist, it is a figure that at first it seems that it should be defined in the negative, as in he or she is not a moralist, or at least he's not mainly a moralist. And if he is an erudite, it's not it wouldn't be, or it shouldn't be, the traditional figure of the man who knows it all.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm trying to think. I'm gaining time. And trying to think, because I don't want to fall back on famous Deleuzian characters that everybody knows about, from Bartleby's clerk to Antonin Artaud to all these to again Kafkaian characters that could embody, because it would be too easy. It would be nice to try and find a figure that would do that, namely simply taking the risk of its own failure as the only possible success, so to speak. It's quite funny, because I'm going to tell you something, and this is now that I'm about to tell you that, I realize that it's both very Deleuzian again. So maybe I'm simply a copycat, or not even a copycat, or just a sad disciple, which would be very, very horrible. But anyway, something which is both very Deleuzian and at the same time that puts an interesting contrast with this other book that you spoke about that is going to be released in a few weeks on narcocapitalismo, which is, you know, devoted to drugs and chemical substances in anesthesia. And this figure would be the drunk. I don't know if I'm saying so because I tend to be a drunk myself and have a strong relationship to drinking, or because Deleuze himself was a drunk, but of a different type than me, because he was a daily drunk, let's say. At a certain point in his career, as you know, it's the famous theory of the penultimate glass, the glass that you drink, the last glass that you drink at the end of an evening, and that is the glass that will allow you to start drinking the day after, you know. And if you go wandering too much, you will not be able to drink the day after because you will be dead. So there's this whole theory of drinking in Deleuze, which is very, very bizarre, you know, this idea of the penultimate drink. I have a different vision of drinking and drunkenness, but there's this idea with drunkenness, is that drunkenness has something to do with a word that in the 19th century was considered horrendous, a word that was the thing that everybody was afraid of. And this word was the word excitation or excitement. I don't know in Spanish, but in French, there's only one word for the two. No, excitation is both excitation and excitement. But I don't know why the English and the Americans make this distinction between excitation, which is a little bit more sexual, you know, more bodily, and excitement, which is a little bit more cerebral. Oh, I'm so excited, you know. But let's say that excitement conveys a true meaning, and in excitement there's this idea of excitare, you know, the outside, and citare being called by the judicial authorities, you know, historically speaking or etymologically speaking. Citare is to be called in front of a judge to reach the moment of its judgment. So, but the excitare is to be taken outside of its own home by a force that is superior to yourself, so to speak. And this idea of excitation is precisely what in the 19th century, all the anesthetics, the invention of the anesthetics, but also then the invention of the antidepressant drugs and even some recreative drugs and so on and so forth, have been created in order to, you know, wipe out the possibility of excitation, and to give you back to the necessity of being yourself. And it is something that we hear all about all the time, you know, in self-help. You know, you have to reconcile with yourself, you know, be yourself, find yourself back, and so on and so forth. Well, if you read the history of anesthetics and anesthesia and the fight against excitation, you realize that, you know, be yourself is actually the worst nightmare that can happen. It's be yourself is stay at your place, go to your, you know, be efficient at work, you know, don't make a fuss, and so on and so forth. And there are historical evidence for that. But the idea of excitation, on the other hand, is part and parcel with the history of drunkenness throughout the world, from the very origins to the present, and depending on whatever culture you can think of. You know, if you think about the drunk calligraphy, or even drunk kung fu in Chinese Taoism, if you think about political drunkenness in Japan at the end of the Meiji era, when you think about the importance of the ethics of the drunk in, you know, Islamic Baghdad in the 9th or 10th century of the present era, you know that there's the dimension of excitation, of going out of the frontiers of the disciplined frontiers of something that appeals to me, and that is directly related to something that for me is part and parcel with pop philosophy, namely seduction. Actually, seduction, the seducer and the drunk are the one and the same. Or the person who is into excitement and the person who is into seduction is the same. And the fright, the fear that was caused by either excitation in the 19th century or seduction throughout time are based on the same idea. Seducere in Latin is to be driven outside of your path, to be led to another direction, that the direction that was supposed to be traced for you and your behavior. So excitation and seduction basically are one and the same. And so I would create a galaxy of drunks and of femme fatale and of seducers, and I don't know who will, and maybe cheaters, and I don't know who would be into this crowd of earth digger and dust digger that give us back the sense of the intensity of the world that Deleuze was speaking about when he was speaking about pop philosophy. Sorry for the lyricism of my answer.
No, that was great. I just well, we have more questions here. There's a new one from Carla. Carla is plainly asking, would you consider yourself as an erudite? I'm assuming it refers to the more traditional notion of erudition.
I'm going to tell you something. I'm very good at faking it. That I can do. But if I need all those books in my library, it's precisely because I forget everything. So I need to outsource my knowledge. And I have a completely crazy relationship with books. So everything I do in my life, I need a book for it. If I want to eat something, I need a book. If I want to drink something, I need a book. If I want to go somewhere, I need a book. If I want to meet someone, I need a book. I don't know. Not anymore, let's say. But if I want to do whatever, first there is a book. Now the book can be transformed into this book, but I need a book. And that's why I have this, frenetic need to accumulate books, because there are all the things that I can forget. I don't need to have that, all these things there. I don't need to have that in my head. So I'm erudite in the sense of, yes, I fake it, and I love the taste of that. I love the taste of erudition. I love it. I love quotations in 5 languages. I love complex philological etymology. I love that. I love that because I feel that I'm always slightly an imposter when I'm writing such things down, and it excites me to say, oh my God, is it that easy? But for the rest, I'm afraid not. I'm always impressed, by all those authors. I love those books, when that nobody reads, published by very small publishers about the notion of pharma in the late Roman Republic, and people devote 400 pages through. I'm fascinated by that, and I'd love to be able to do that, but unfortunately I cannot. First, I have theoretical asthma, so to speak, so I can run only 100 pages, whereas doing this 600 thick brick of and second, I don't know what's second, but yeah, that's an ontological question.
Well, the way you put it, it sort of sounds like the figure of the erudite that we should all tend to would be like Lex Luthor in Superman 1, that famous scene when Superman steps into the house of the European erudite that's filled with books and pretty much like yours, and listens to classical music. And I always found it very funny how this how the figure of Lex Luthor encapsulates the common Americans' skepticism towards European allegedly so-called hyper-cultured types.
Yeah, there's something to it, but precisely it's an erotic figure. That's what's interesting. Both Lex Luthor himself is a he's always driven by some weird erotic impulses, be it towards his secretary, but it's most the secretary that's most erotically driven towards him than the other way around. But anyway, there's this kind of desire and excitement when he's plotting things and so on and so forth. At least in the movies, when they are when seen personified by Gene Hackman. so there's this erotic dimension to knowledge. I think is of course the true maybe the interesting meaning of erudition, and we know that American culture has a problem with eroticism. They will always do, you know, even at the core of the most pornographic, let's say, scene. There's always a form of Puritanism that is involved. So the most pornographic scenes of the most, you know, radical gonzo American production always resembles some form of, you know, athletic challenge, you know, and maybe that's how, you know, I can reconcile with erudition as something which is absurd. You know, the eroticism of the absurd, of something which is, what the fuck? Where the fuck is that? You know, precisely, you know, you've probably seen this video, amazing video, post-mortem video, that is very easily found on YouTube or wherever, which is simply the visit that Umberto Eco does of his personal library. It lasts 1 minute long because it's so immense and so full of books that simply walking across the first corridor, first room, then a second room, then and with books everywhere, that you realize it's something so overblown, so over the top, and even to some extent a bit childish when you remember that they had him, Umberto Eco, and his good friend Roberto Calasso, who is the head. Now he has been for 40 years the head of Adelphi, which is the biggest and most prestigious publishing house in Italy, and probably one of the biggest and most prestigious in Europe. I mean, Adelphi, their catalog is just perfect. I don't know how they do that, but it's just perfect. Even when they publish a hard-boiled novel, it's just always the good one, you know. And Calasso and him, they always fought about their library, you know. Eco has his own gigantic library, and Calasso had 3 private apartments only for his library. And at the end of the life of Eco, it's Calasso himself told this story, so it's not it's an hearsay. Had accumulated like 50,000 books. 50,000 books. There are public libraries that are not that big, right? 50,000 books. And Calasso, when he was asked about his own library, if he had more or less, because they were always fighting to see who would get the most, he said, "No, I had less, but mine were better." And this stupid thing, you know, about accumulating those books and finding which, it's part of the ridicule of erudition. And it's at this moment of ridicule that erudition becomes interesting again, because precisely the seriousness of the knowledge becomes replaced by the eroticism of the collector, or the perverse enjoyment of the person who actually doesn't care about knowledge. He only cares about, or she cares about books, and about having the first edition of Die Falke in the complete order, you know. So Karl Kraus journal that Karl Kraus was writing almost all alone, and Roberto Calasso is one of the only one in the world who has the complete series of Die Falke as it was published in 19 I don't remember when. That solves the idea of erudition. So as a game, I love it. As a form of eroticism, I love it. As a form of monument in front of which we have to kneel, it's the box that Deleuze was speaking about.
It's the box. You gotta think outside the box, as businessmen used to say. Related to that, we have another message by our common acquaintance, novelist Juan Francisco Ferrer. Hola Juan Francisco, desde aquí. It's a very short message with the words Jack Sparrow and the question mark. Jack Sparrow, I suppose that must relate to our previous debate on figures, on possible embodiments of the figures of knowledge, and the pirate Well, the romantic thief could probably be a suitable figure, wouldn't it?
Juan, you're a bastard. Let me tell you that in front, you're a bastard. I love you, by the way. Yes, because yeah, it's true. I have written a book about Jack Sparrow. It was a commission, but one of the commissions that I most thoroughly enjoyed working on. It was a new series of books in Belgium dedicated to pop cultural heroes. And they very kindly asked me if I would write one. And I asked, how much is this in terms of money? And they said, that much. I said, okay, all right, well, why not? Very nice, thank you. And then they asked me, and what characters would you write about? And I said, I don't know. So I sent them a list with lots of usual suspects, you know, saying pop culture hero. Who would you write about? I don't know, Darth Vader, Indiana Jones, I don't know, or James Bond. The usual suspects. And at the end of the list, but with, you know, something tickling inside of me, I put Jack Sparrow. And they decided that I would do this Jack Sparrow thing. And I was so happy about that, because Jack Sparrow is a fascinating character, not simply in the history of pop culture, because it's quite weird that, thanks maybe to Johnny Depp, or thanks to Jerry Bruckheimer, or thanks to maybe to Gore Verbinski, the director of the three first, and in my opinion, the three only Jack Sparrow movie, they have made, you know, alive someone that is part of the attempt for creating a false universe around a Luna Park attraction. Because that's the thing, you know, Jack Sparrow was created simply because they had this attraction in the Disney World and Disneyland about pirates, but they didn't have any universe or any film or any anime to go with it. So at some point they said, maybe we should do something about that. And they created Jack Sparrow. And then it went completely, you know, over the top, and it was adored by lots of people and so on and so forth. And so much that personally, when the movies went out, I didn't go and see them. I said, oh, you know, maybe some kind of teenage romance, come pirates. I'm not interested. Plus Johnny Depp, yeah, always doing his Johnny Depp. Not interested. And finally, I went to see the third one, and I was just blown away. My brain exploded, and exploded because of Depp, because of the character, because of the speed. The question of speed is at the core of this thing, and it's at the core of the history of Hollywood. You know, when you watch screwball comedies, when you watch, of course, race car movies and so on. So the question of speed and the possibility of infinite speed through images is always at the core of movies. And then there you have that, yeah, the speed of the blah blah, of the action and whatever, and a speed which is pure speed without necessary ground, you know, or without necessary necessity even, or narrative necessity. And I was fascinated by that, and I was also fascinated by the camera of Gore Verbinski. For me, is one of the most underrated directors around. Really, he has a vision, and he put a stamp on these movies, whatever we can think of them. And I wanted to do something with this character and to explore what it was the embodiment. And perhaps he is the pop philosopher. He is the man who talks too much, a bit like me. He's the seducer. I would not speak of that. He is the one who is obsessed with a law that cannot be reduced to law. You know, there's this idea very strange that, you know, it's Carl Schmitt, when Carl Schmitt speaks about the nomos of the earth. Well, would there be a nomos of the sea? There has been attempts, historical attempts, at putting the nomos of the earth on the sea. But what the pirates embody, and especially Jack Sparrow, is of course the impossibility for the sea to be governed by the nomos of the earth, the impossibility of the law of the earth to actually decide for what happens in the sea, because there's something aquatic to it that, you know, you don't have the grasp. And the pirate is, let's say, I would say the jurists, but something like that, of the aquatic milieu. And I wanted to to investigate how Jack Sparrow is the most fascinating of characters, and much deeper and much more interesting, exciting again than simply a funny fellow for teenagers to whom a Disney attraction has to be fed and to be sold. And maybe there's something with Sparrow that could embody pop philosophy as Deleuze understood it. Thank you, Juan.
It was always on the time. So great. So have like still 7 minutes, and I suppose it's a good time to speak a little about drugs, about capital, and about your next book coming up in Spain next February or April, as far as I know. One of the things that I found more interesting about narco-capitalism is the way in which you combine and connect different fields of research in such a way that the knowledge about illegal drugs, etc., relates to economy. So one question I would like to ask you is how did you reach the conclusion that these two fields of knowledge that seem to be significantly different had such a direct connection?
Yes, that's a good question. To be fair, what I wanted to do was, I'm sorry to speak about things that I wanted to do, because it simply means that I didn't do it. I did something different instead. But what I wanted to do was to explore the link between being and excitation. I don't like the category of being. I have a problem with the category of being. So I wanted to do something a little bit vicious towards the category of being and use a category of excitation for that. But I didn't want it to be a philosophical book. I wanted to write a book that would tell a series of vignettes, a series of short, stories. It's not a historical book. It's not a history of drugs in modernity, but some snippets out of this history of drugs, be them medical or recreational, that would together create a series of short circuits that would give, let's say, the sensation or the understanding, even if it's an obscure understanding, that there's something rotten with the idea of being, and that the fear of excitation that permeates modernity is something that should be part and parcel of our even political struggles today. And indeed, when you look at the history of drugs, it is directly related to the history of capitalism, not simply from the point of view of circumstances, not by chance, but really substantially. Mm-hmm. Meaning by that if we can consider that the 20th century, for instance, or let's say the second part of the 20th century was the century of oil, and that actually capital was oil, or to be precise, capital or capitalism was the fact that oil had no price. And so it means that oil was simply free-flowing money with no extraction costs, or almost no extraction costs. So some fantasy, let's say, of capital without price, so profit without price. Let's say that drugs is what capitalism has been in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and still to a certain extent is for the moment, namely the deliberate organization of a certain regime of being that can be best characterized by the idea of anesthesia. That is the reduction, let's say, of human life to a being that is basically a body upon which you can work, and from which you can extract also, of course, money and richness. And precisely, when you start, I mean, the book starts with the invention of the first anesthetics, chloral hydrate, in the United States in 1835, I think, or 1853, as a moment which is incredible in the history of both humanity and the history of medicine, because suddenly it was possible to, operate the body, to have a surgical act on a body without the body reacting, meaning without the person suffering and screaming and having to be, knocked down, drunk or whatever, in order to be able to do what, even to extract, a tooth. With the anesthesia, suddenly the body became exactly that, a body, something you can perform an act, you can operate the body without the body being in the way, so to speak. So a body reduced to its own passivity as a field of operation. And this meaning of anesthesia has never left us. And the history of chemistry in the 19th century and in the beginning of the 20th century is the history of finding new ways for putting these anesthetical properties of certain chemicals into different forms and for different aspects. Of course, the most striking one is the antidepressants that most of us are using on a daily basis, which are directly derived from these very first inventions of the anesthetics. You can do the genealogy and show that the modern antidepressant are actually anesthetics transformed into a different with different formula, but the molecules, if you go back, are basically the same or proceed or work on the same in the same way. And it's the same for recreational drugs, which were basically at first also anesthetics or solutions to dysfunctional anesthetics. Cocaine, when it was invented by Bayer, was something that was really nothing but that. It was something that was a local and the first local anesthetics, namely for eye operations or tooth operations, and it was considered as a revolution in terms of how to anesthetize the body, not globally but locally. And then it becomes something different. But the anesthetical, let's say, aspect of cocaine, despite the visible effect that it can have when you go to a party where everybody is under coke, or if you take some yourself, that it makes you talk and so on and so forth. But actually, it's a discussion that is void and mechanical, so to speak. You're a puppet whose words are simply dancing through your mouth and being repeated from one party to another, from one evening to another, from one dinner to another. When you're under coke, you spend your time repeating yourself. That's why personally I hate this drug, because it's the least interesting of all the drugs that exist, besides this anesthetical dimension that goes to it. And we can go on and on and on. And in the book, I speak, of course, of cocaine. I speak about the pill and how the pill was, so the contraceptive pill was invented. What was the goal behind this the contraceptive pill? What are the molecules involved in it? How it also was invented in order to take control, so to speak, of the body and to colonize the body of women in order to make them more productive from the capitalist point of view. So to be less dependent upon children and more dependent upon work, and on and on. The sleeping pill, and which is the same, and so on and so forth. So it's really about capitalism not simply as an economical system, but as almost a metaphysical system, as a view of the world, at what type of life, what type of being is involved in it, and what type of psychopathology also is involved in it. And it's not by chance. I will stop on this topic right after that. It's not by chance that the biggest promoter of mental health, whose basic hypothesis, revolutionary psychiatrists whose hypotheses are still the ones who governing what's the abbreviation for this book? The yearly book that the World Psychiatric Association publishes that defines the different mental illness. So the DSM, Diagnostical Statistical Manual, the DSM.
Yeah, DSM.
The DSM manual are still based on hypotheses that bear the name of this person, the name of this Austrian psychiatrist of the end of the 19th century, whose name is Emil Kraepelin. And Emil Kraepelin was not only a psychiatrist and a revolutionary psychiatrist who invented the syndrome question in psychiatry, but he also was the head of an hospital, and was often confronted to people being especially in the sections devoted to his specialty, which was manic depression. He invented the idea of manic depression as a common, as a specific syndrome. In the case where there is one of his clients or one of his patients would enter into mania, he had to deal with that. And he had to deal with that precisely because mania is contagious. The excitation, as he wrote, is the word that he used. The excitation of mania was something that he had to take care of. And he had to take care of in a very specific way, because he didn't believe that he could cure manic depression. For him, manic depression was not something you can cure of, you can simply tame it. And how would you tame it? Well, by avoiding at all costs that a manic depressive turn manic. So that means that in his head, the good manic depressive is the depressive. And he promoted heavily and the use of a substance. That's chloral hydrate. Sorry, that's not the first anesthetic. Chloral hydrate is the first, let's say, antidepressant or the first anti-manic in depression. So he promoted the heavy use of chloral hydrate to wipe out the manic side. So what he called the excitation of the manic depressive, so that people can be considered, can stay calm and can stay, let's say, depressive. And that's still the logic of today. And what is interesting, and then I'm really finished, what's interesting is that the expression that he uses in his own manual, which is a classic, an absolute classic in the history of psychiatry, his Lehrbuch für Psychiatrie, the word that he uses in the edition where suddenly manic depression appears is the word irre sein. What he wants to avoid is irre sein. Irre sein, irre sein. Sein is being, and irre is the erring of being. What he wants to avoid is that being err. So being, they go out of the way and they just wander in the countryside. He wants people to stick to their being without being erring. And if you understand that the being in question is the depressive without the manic side, well, you understand that the divide is precisely between being and the excitation, the errance or the erring that you want to get rid of. And this opposition is the psychopathology of capital as we still live it today, or at least that's a claim I'm trying to make in that book.
Mm-hmm. And it's it's a very enlightening claim. We got several messages, one of them by Francisco Ariel Cabello, that want to thank you for your enlightening lecture. It was for me. We could be speaking here for hours, but we're a little beyond time. So it's been quite a wonderful evening. We touched upon many different aspects of your work, and I'm pretty sure that some of that many people who are watching La Virreina channel are going to be Laurent de Sutter's readers quite soon. Some of them already are. So thanks a lot, Laurent. It's been a great evening, and we hope that you stay well, despite we imagine you there in rainy Brussels, locked in your library and creating new short yet extraordinary books. So we hope for more of that.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a privilege talking to you all and to all of that I can't see, and that I'm very grateful for your patience and welcome, and I hope to see you for real as soon as possible. And thank you so much again, Eloy, for your kind invitation. I hope I can pay you that back sometime.
Well, you're right. It's our pleasure, Laurent. And as usual, we'll keep in touch. I per tots els que ens heu estat veient, para todos los que nos habéis estado viendo, muchas gracias por vuestra atención y por vuestra participación. Chequead la web de la Virreina porque próximamente nos vemos para la tercera sesión del desorden ordinario, el desordre ordinari. Muchas gracias.